see if we can actually get a really good, clean YouTube stream this time. Third time's a charm, you know. This is the fourth time I've tried it. Third or fourth? I don't remember. Okay, well, welcome to the WordPress Meetup. I'm John Overall, for those who don't know who I am yet. Dean, and I can't remember his last name at the moment, will be here to give his presentation, which is going to be how to use different email programs and how to hook them up, connect them, the pitfalls and the other problems along with them. He's going to be talking about Outlook. I can't remember the other ones right at the moment. But it sounds like an interesting program. I might even learn something from it, so at least I'm hoping. I'm going to be talking tonight to you about WordPress disaster prevention and recovery, and the things you can do to help prepare your website and yourself for the inevitable. Well, not always inevitable, but it's always best to be prepared. Even I've been hacked once in a while. Been a while, but it has happened. So a little background about me. I've been working at WordPress for almost 20 years. This year is the 20th anniversary of my company, my business. I started in 1999 as a business. I've been working on the internet since before it was the internet. Back when it was bulletin boards and fetch and God, I can't even remember. All the stuff, you know, 300 baud modem, and I was woohoo, dial up. And just when you get into something, one of the kids picks up the phone in the other room, and you're dead. At any rate, I've been working with WordPress now for 10 years almost. I've been working as WordPress as long as my youngest son. And I started just before he was born, or just after he was born. So it's been almost 10 years for me with WordPress itself. And I've seen it grow into the behemoth it is. My specialty is in WordPress plugins and finding and working on plugins, not in writing them. I hire that fellow over there when I really need code written. I can get just so far, and then I got to hire somebody to help me get over the hump. So if you're ever in need of a WordPress custom plugin, go talk to Sean. He's really good. Good work.
Gee, thanks, John.
What you did for me this week, you saved me hours of time in what you did in a few short hours. So with that being said, we'll start right into it. WordPress disaster and prevention planning. This is something a lot of people give very little thought to. They get their website built, they'll spend $1, $2, $3, $10, $15, $20,000 for a website, and then they'll forget to do disaster planning. And disaster planning is one of the things you need to do the most. Mainly because it's not guaranteed, but there's a higher than average chance you will get hacked, or something will go wrong, or the servers you're on will crash and corrupt. The problems are numerous. All kinds of things can happen. And a lot of people just forget to do it, their planning. And then what they also forget is even if they plan it, they never test their plans to make sure they're working. So we're going to talk to you a bit about what you need to do. Now, first off, we're going to talk a little bit about what are the main causes of you've been hacked on a website or something else has gone wrong. One of them is not doing regular updates. This is something that people just fail to do. They might do an update once every 6 months, once a year, every 2 years, or not at all. I can't count the innumerable times the clients come to me. I've got one right now. Their website's been online for 4 or 5 years. They just started bringing it up to date and doing some work on it. And then they get a question, should I be making a backup? Yeah, you should. Do you have one? No, we don't have. And then we got into it, find out that they've got one of them web hosting providers, something about a nightmare hosting or something. And a really hard place to make backups from. They don't make it easy, they charge you extra for it, and things like that go on. And this creates problems, and a lot of hosting companies don't provide free backups for their clients. They charge extra for these backups, and then they do not guarantee those backups. And I've seen more often than not the backups are corrupted, or they're up to date, or they're partial, or they're just not complete. I've seen that a little too often. Another main cause of sites getting hacked is insecure web hosting. Again, another nightmare. And incorrect file permissions. And these should have gone out with the way of the dodo ages ago for hosting companies. But there are still hosting companies that require you to get things done to use an insecure setting on a web server for your files. And it happens it's rare. I don't run into it as often as I used to, but it does happen. But then there can also be plugins for WordPress. I still find the occasional plugin, I'll install it. It'll set up files and it'll set up what's known as 777 permissions on files or folders. What that means is that folder is open for anyone in the world to get into your website, access it, and write content into your website. And they can stick a program in there and then have free reign in your website. And there's still plugins that do that. It always blows me away that still occurs, but it does. So this is one of the things that has to be checked, your security of your website. Another one I still run into from time to time, which again surprises me, and this one should have been taken care of years ago, is WordPress websites that still have a administrator username of admin. That was the default setting for installation of WordPress for its first 7 years, which is why they still exist on many sites and people haven't removed them or changed the name of the administrator. But having the default name of admin just means that there's a definite target on a website that hackers will attack, and they do. I still get pings on my servers for them trying to hit websites that's trying to get into the admin account, even though the account doesn't exist. They're basically wasting their time, but it still happens. So this is something that has to be checked, and a lot of people still have it, and they need to check that. One of the one of the other primary causes of a site being hacked is weak passwords. If you're not aware of it, there's been another data dump on the internet this last week. Tens of millions of accounts from 15 or 20 high-profile websites. The account usernames and passwords were dumped onto the internet for hackers to use. And what hackers do with this data is they collate it and they feed it into one of their programs that does a dictionary attack against the site. And it just takes a username and it matches a password to it and keeps going. And one of the flaws with that, of course, is that many people, I used to do it years ago, I stopped doing it about 4 years ago, and that was use the same password across multiple accounts. Made things convenient, but now if you do that, and one of your accounts gets compromised on some place where you've forgotten about, they can compromise all of your accounts that use that same email and password. So that's something to think about. The best thing to do is to get a password manager program. I use RoboForm myself for my password manager. There's several different ones out there, but find one, pick one, and use it. And then you only have one password to remember, and your password manager manages all the others. I think my RoboForm has currently 22,000 passwords in it. That's how many places I've logged in. My accounts, clients' accounts, accounts of accounts of accounts, it builds. Some of them I should probably go through and clean up, but I just can't be bothered.
How does the RoboForm manage?
Oh.
What technique does it use?
I can show you real quick. RoboForm is a great tool if you use Firefox. It doesn't quite show on that screen, so we got to move it up a little.
Is WordPress?
Yes, it is. Welcome to it. You can see right across the bottom here, it's got a password manager tool. I log into that with my master password. And once I'm logged in with my master password, it's got all of my logins for everywhere I go.
And that can't be hacked?
I can't say that because there's nothing out there that can't be hacked. Everything can be hacked. It's just this is more secure
Than you trying to remember.
than trying to remember
13.
13-digit passwords that are a random assortment of letters and numbers and other miscellaneous stuff. So yeah, there's nothing that can't be hacked. Everything can be hacked. It's a matter of time and money. You know, even the greatest computers out there have been hacked. I mean, I read an article today that blockchain is being hacked. So if blockchain can be hacked, everything can be hacked. So I thought that was interesting because they said blockchain can't be hacked. And it's like, yeah, okay, somebody took that challenge. Challenge accepted. I'm off. Okay, so what do you want to do if these things happen? What you're looking for next is your planning steps. You're going to want to create a backup plan and stick to it. You're going to want to test your backups, and you're going to want to keep at least the last 10 backups. Okay? I personally keep 25. And they go back for 6 months or a year. And more than once has this saved my ass. And this is simply because backups, you could get a corrupted backup, and you could be backing up a corrupted system several times and not even know it's corrupted. It happened to me once in my last business. I owned a computer store out in Souk during the mid-90s for a little while. And I went for 5 days, and I backed up my system every day. I kept 25 backups, so I backed up every night, all of my sales data, my accounting, everything. And then what happened was, I came in one morning and I couldn't log into my system. It was corrupted. I went, okay, we'll go back to yesterday's backup. I can lose a day's worth of data. Yesterday's was corrupt. The day before's was corrupt. The day before that was corrupt. The day before, I had to go back 5 days before I found a clean backup. I lost 5 days worth of data, but I didn't lose everything. But that was because I had backups and I could go consecutively back until I found one that worked. So you can be backing up a corruption. That corruption might not show for days. So that's something to keep in mind. Creating a backup plan. This is very important. What I do, like I run my own servers. I have my own hosting business, johnoverall.com hosting, and all of my servers create 7 different backups. They create a backup every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They create and they keep those. It creates a backup every Sunday, and it creates a backup on the 1st and the 15th of every month. So at any given point in time, and I keep 2 of the weekly backups, and I keep 2 of the monthly backups. The daily backups, I only keep the last 3. But at any given point in time, I have 7 different backups available from different dates on my server. And that's not the only place I back them up. That's my server's automation. I personally, off of my sites, I FTP in and download manual files and back up. And I do this for my clients also. I manually download even though I know another backup exists. It's just to have multiple backups. So with your plan, if you're on another hosting provider, Bluehost or GoDaddy or whatever, they supposedly make regular backups for you, but they don't guarantee them. They don't even guarantee that the backups are being run. You have to double check it yourself. Your best bet is to go in and do manual backups on it. Now, once you have a schedule where you keep your backups and you've got regular backups, periodically, I think I do it about once every 6 months or so. I just grab a backup and I load it up into a test environment and see if my website works from that backup. So you got to test the backup once in a while to make sure your backups are actually working. Because it's no good to have the backups only to find out you've been backing up corrupted data, or that your backup is getting corrupted at random periods in time. So what do you use for doing your backups? The cPanel is the best backup system you can use. If you're on a good hosting provider, you have a cPanel system. It is the primary control panel for web hosting providers out there. They might customize it for their particular business, or they might not. They might remove all the cPanel logos, but it'll still be a cPanel system. Almost all the major hosting providers use cPanel now. Many of them didn't for a long time. Some of them tried to reinvent the wheel, only to realize years later that they just shouldn't. They should just go with a company that's dedicated their whole life to doing this. The cPanel system allows you to go into the cPanel, click a button, and it will make a backup and then you can download that backup directly to your computer as a massive zip file. It's probably the best and easiest way to do it. Second best way is a manual FTP and a manual database dump to get your database and your files. If those options aren't available to you or too much technical, the next thing you'll want to do is set up a plugin in your WordPress website. Now, setting up a plugin in your WordPress website comes with a couple of caveats. One of them is depending on your host or your hosting provider and the account that they've set you up on will determine whether or not a backup plugin will even run for you. Because many hosting providers, if you get a hosting provider, we'll pick my fave one is GoDaddy, you get their $4 a month hosting account, $7 a month hosting account, it's got so few resources available to you that if you put in a backup plugin such as BackWP Up, Time Capsule's a new one, I don't know how that would work, Updraft Plus, or Duplicator, those plugins may barely work or most likely won't work. They won't give you a complete backup. They'll get you a partial backup, they'll fail partway through, they'll say they made a backup, but when you check the files, it's missing stuff. And that is because the resources aren't available on the server for this plugin to run. So this is a caveat with the plugins. You can try them. This new plugin I've tested for WP Time Capsule, I just reviewed it 3 weeks ago in my podcast. Very nice plugin, but it is a third-party service. Okay? They come into your site, they do the backups, you get the backups to your computer, but most of the programming is run from their server to your website. And what they do is they come in small increments and grab it. I set it up on a test site on my server, and I tested it up on almost a brand new install of WordPress. Had one theme, 4 plugins, and no content. The amount of time it took for it to do a backup when I tested it took like 2 hours, 3 hours to do the backup. Because it was making calls, and it makes the calls very slow. And when I checked the backup, it was complete, but it took a long time to accomplish. But this is the sort of plugin that does have an automation on it, so you can set it up to do the backups every couple of days, automatically. And it sends you an email when the backup is done. So it's a very nice plugin, and it could be a way around small accounts. But their service is $20 a month, I believe, something like that. You get the first 30 days free, and then after that, it's $20 a month. So it is a way to do backups on a WordPress website. But these are the ways you'll want to do your backups. And your backups are probably the most important thing you'll do. Because of all the things you have, your backup is your biggest lifesaver.
Have you looked at Backup Buddy?
Backup Buddy?
Yeah.
I haven't touched that in years. They made it such a mess of it years ago that I just completely abandoned them. And they may have improved, but I've had no reason to go back to them. There's another one out there, WordPress, the one by Automatic, used to be really good, but they recently rolled it into their, what's that ugly plugin WordPress makes?
Oh.
Where they've dumped everything in.
Jetpack?
That's it, Jetpack.
Yeah. I usually look at Jetpack and keep going like, yeah, that's something, I'm not adding that.
I still run into it from time to time, and some people actually use the things that are in Jetpack, and it's like, oh god, because everything Automatic makes is rolled into Jetpack, and it's the most bloated. It's the biggest piece of bloatware out there, and they lost a fair amount of clients by rolling WordPress into it. Because a lot of people just went, I don't want to be involved in Jetpack. I just want your WordPress, and they went, no, just too bad. We know you better. You know yourself. I love them for that. Okay, so prevention tips. What do you want to do to prepare? These are things you'll want to look at to prepare your site from anything happening to it. And just to avoid the problems that come with it. Of course, the first one, you'll hear me hit this constantly, back it up. Regular backups. One of the best prevention tools you can use. Anti-malware plugin. Again, there's a small caveat with low-end hosting. You have a tough time running the anti-malware plugins on there. My favorite, and I'm in controversy with many people, is I like WordFence. Many people don't like WordFence because sometimes it can be resource intensive. And there is a couple others out there, and I can't remember who's the other one out there. Not Updraft, but very popular. It's made by Backup Buddy, same guys who do Backup Buddy.
No.
Oh. It's not WP Security, is it?
No, not WP Security. At any rate, there's a couple of them out there. Like, my favorite anti-malware though is WordFence. I just default to that. I've tested it over the years. I've been using it now for about 4 years. It's gotten better. It used to be a lot more resource intensive. Now it's not. The hard thing about it is getting it set up correctly the first time, because their default settings leave it open to resource intensive. You have to change their default settings. And that is one of your biggest things you can do. And their malware plugin also has a firewall, a code size, a website firewall. So it's a firewall on your website, not just a firewall at your server. If you're with a good hosting company, you already have a server firewall, but you need one at your website for stuff that their server doesn't stop. And theirs works very, very well. Another thing to do is monitor your website for any unusual changes. Now for this particular service, what I do for monitoring a website for unusual changes is I use a plugin called WP File Monitor Plus. It is a fantastic little lightweight plugin, works on everything I've ever put it on. All it does is initially when you install it, it scans through every single file in your WordPress install. And it makes a memory notation somewhere in the database of all those files and their sizes. And then what it does, it just sits there and it runs a scan however often you want. I set it for twice a day. If I'm having a website that's got a problem, I have it set hourly for scanning. One time this plugin actually saved my bacon when I have had an active hacker on a website that was changing files as fast as I could change them back. I was changing stuff, he was changing it back, and it's like, and I couldn't figure out how it was getting in there. So it was just the most bizarre thing. It happened to me once, fighting an active hacker. But this program, every time I had it constantly, I was pinging it, running it, and I see the file change instantly, so I know where it was. So I finally found this path after about an hour and stopped it. But this plugin here, I've loved that plugin ever since, because it showed me exactly where the file changed, what time it changed, and when. The problem with it is you do updates, it scans, you'll get a list of several hundred files. But you're expecting those changes. So you gotta, as soon as you do your updates, you run this plugin so you know all the file changes just occurred. Don't let it happen 2 hours later, because a hacker could have come in and changed something in those 2 hours, and you're not going to look at that 700 plus file list. So that's the thing. But this plugin here is one you'll want to do. It's WP File Monitor Plus. Free plugin. It almost got killed. It was one that was on my list to be forked and redone. I think we talked about it a year and a half ago. Somebody else picked it up and forked it. And there's a new managed and updated version of the exact same plugin. They cleaned it up and made it modern.
Awesome.
And that's what I was just thrilled. So you got to look for it. And there's two of them in WordPress. One's called WP File Monitor. The other one's WP File Monitor Plus. The Plus is the newest version. Look for the version that has been updated recently. I can't remember the author who's got it now, but the other author just abandoned it. Update your WordPress core files. Now this one here does come with caveats too. If you're upgrading to a major version of WordPress, say you're going from WordPress 4 to WordPress 5, the updates have to be done carefully to make sure that you're not going to break things on your website just because of all the file changes. But if it's, say, you're already running version 5 and they've gone to version 5.3, you want to update, because that's a point version. That usually means that they've done some security fixes or minor fixes or bug fixes. And that's what you're looking for. And there's a bunch of bug fixes that just came out in WordPress recently. They just released an article, I think it was today, that there's a day one, is it called day one? First day, or what's it called?
Day zero.
Day zero, a day zero exploit. A day zero exploit has been discovered in WordPress.
And that's on the 4X series that, yeah.
Yeah, and that exploit just got released, and the hackers that didn't know about it now know about it. So that means they're busy writing code to take advantage of it. So you'll want to update core files.
How do you update core files?
You'll log into WordPress, and unless it's turned off in your WordPress, you'll see a button up the top that says Updates. When you click Updates, it'll take you to the screen, and it'll say Update WordPress version. You just click the button, and it automatically updates. Now, of course, that's still, I guess it's back up to about 97% success rate of updates. For a while there, they dropped to 90% success rate. I rather enjoyed that. I had a lot of work back then. So, but they're getting better at it. But I think they're going to get worse for a while since they went to Gutenberg, because they've got a lot of bugs in that system. And they're still working their way through it. I've updated only about half my clients' websites, and I've got 4 clients now for certain that we can't go to Gutenberg, period, without a complete redesign of everything, because the code won't work.
What is Gutenberg exactly?
It's a block editor. It's basically a fancy page editor that they integrated into the core of WordPress, along with implementing a crap load of Java. They dumped a whole new file folder of Java, pure JavaScript in the new Gutenberg. I noticed it when I had to back up, and all of a sudden I got this notice of all these extra files. I'm like, what are these from? And I looked and went, oh, and I started comparing. And it's like, there's 2 brand new folders in WordPress 5, and one of them is just a whole bunch of JavaScript files to run the Gutenberg stuff, I think. So it's quite a mess, and it'll take them a while to get completely sorted. I wish they'd left it as a plugin, but then so does a large chunk of the community. Few people love it, but it's a fancy page editor. Is basically what it is. Fancy page block editor. Personally, I'm moving to Elementor.
No, it's not something that's necessary to.
It comes automatically in WordPress 5 unless you turn it off. You have to turn it off by installing the Classic Editor plugin. And the Classic Editor plugin is only going to be supported by WordPress until 2021. In December of 2021, all bets are off. They're abandoning the Classic Editor of WordPress completely in 2021. December of 2021 is what Matt has said. And because of the way he's acted this last year, I'm 99% certain he's going to do exactly that.
So if you've got Divi, then and you're using that, then you don't have to worry about it.
Divi?
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to, because Divi has updated themselves. Initially, when Gutenberg came out, Divi had some problems, and they had some compatibility issues, but they've since solved them. Divi has made themselves compatible with it, and Divi blocks out Gutenberg. It's like I'm moving to Elementor for my building, and Elementor does the same thing. It pushes the WordPress editors out and brings in their editor instead. And that's the thing is, and I think that'll probably continue that way. And what they'll do is they'll take advantage of the underlying code of Gutenberg. And some of that code's pretty nice, but for a lot of people, for the way I was doing websites, Gutenberg just doesn't work. And for some of my clients, the way they need to add content, like I build the websites, I don't do the content. The Gutenberg editor was confusing because of how it works compared to the standard WordPress editor. So this is where the problem is with that. Other thing you'll want to do is update your themes. If you've got good quality themes such as Divi, I use, what's my favorite theme is, can't remember my theme that I'm always using. It begins with an E. It's not Elementor, because I'm just moving to Elementor. Anyway, update your WordPress themes is what you'll need to do on a regular basis. Update your plugins. This is another big one, is make sure your plugins are up to date, especially because I believe as of December of this year, WordPress is going to drop all support for PHP 5.6, and there's still a good 50% of websites out there running on 5.6. So what's going to happen is a new version of WordPress is not going to work on 5.6, and there's plugins that will only work on WordPress 5.6 unless you get them updated to the ones that work on 5.7. We recently just had that problem with a plugin I was working on. I couldn't figure it out. Thanks again, Sean.
Hey, you know, I was working on a Google hosted site a couple hours ago that was running PHP 5.3. I was like,
I haven't seen that in a while. I've seen
Okay.
5.4 recently.
yeah. It's like, all right, Google, thanks.
Yeah.
Good.
There's still a lot of old stuff out there, and those things are dangerously insecure, and they haven't been supported for years. 5.6 has only been unsupported for about a year and a half now, I believe, so it's not too bad behind. But 5.3, wow, that's like
Mm-hmm.
4 years since they stopped supporting that.
Yeah, release 2010.
Yeah. Okay, and update your plugins, so make sure they're up to date. And again, regular backups. Backup, backup, and backup again. Never fear the backup, and storage is cheap. I was just helping my office manager choose a desktop storage device. You can get a 4 terabyte hard drive, plugs into a USB now for 110 bucks. You know, so storage is cheap. 4 terabytes, that's good for a couple of months of storage for me, so. Other thing you'll want to do is, no blank space in there. Okay. You're gonna stick. There we go. Lock down your website. And this is an important thing to do. You may not know how, you might have to call in a pro to help you lock down your website. There are plugins that will help you lock down your website. And the problem with the plugins, though, is if the plugin fails or somebody figures out how to turn off your plugin directory, all of that lockdown stuff no longer works because it's done through database and other stuff. So one of the problems with WordFence, if your plugin fails, or like WordFence, one of the dangers of WordFence is you can actually lock yourself out of your own website with WordFence. I've done it. But because I have FTP access, I log in, I disable the plugin, then I log back into my website, then I turn the plugin back on, then I go in and fix the error I made in WordFence settings. That caused me to be locked out. Because they supposedly have a file that's supposed to email you a link, but I have yet to have that properly work. That's one of the flaws I found in it. Locking down your website means checking all your file permissions on your website. Now, I don't mean manually going through all 5,000 files in the WordPress core and I forget how many directories and the other thousands of files in your plugins and themes, etc. You can actually run a program through or an FTP protocol through to do a recursive check and set all the file permissions. Lock down the WP config file. Your WP config file is probably the most important file in your WordPress installation. This file contains your database information, the initial protocols for running your WordPress site. If any hacker can get to your config file, he can get to everything in your website. So this file should always be locked down to the point where it can't be edited by anyone that does not have full administrative permissions through your FTP or your control panel. Use secure passwords. Again, a randomly generated password between 8 and 25 characters or more, depending on what you want. Or one of the things I hear is a really great password is to create a phrase and put it all together. A phrase that's, 4 or 5 words. That creates an excellent random password. And I understand they're pretty hard to hack if you've got a phrase.
John, do you trust the automatically generated passwords that WordPress will give you?
I don't like them.
Password.
They're about as strong as anything else. I don't use it because I don't like them giving me a 22-character password because that's just too much for me. I have my RoboForm has a generator on it. I set it to 12 characters.
Okay.
and I use that, and with that one there, I control what's used in lead generation, and I don't know what's used in the WordPress. It's just as random as any other set of randomly generated numbers. And the random set of numbers can be, yeah, it can be insecure. You're looking at their bar, they say it's secure, but they're just running it through their algorithm, is basically what it is. Probably no different than everyone else's algorithm that says this is a secure password. This is one here where you'll have to do a little bit of research, aside from my double E's. I'll blame it on dyslexia. Turn off any unneeded APIs. And the APIs are the protocols that were implemented by WordPress, I think it was 2 years ago, when they implemented their API calls. I can't remember the full name of the calls. But many of the APIs that are turned on by default in WordPress websites, a good 70 to 80% of the users and websites out there don't need them. One of the APIs that's turned on by default is hackers can come up to your website. If they know your domain name, they can put, I forget the protocol after it, they list users, and they'll list every user in your website. And that's an API that can be turned off, because it doesn't need to be used. But that's a way for a hacker to find out who your users are, usernames, and then they can use that as a beginning basis to hack your website. It's just knowing usernames. But there's a whole raft of APIs. I have a plugin or two that I've reviewed over the last year. I can't remember them, but they're back in my list of show notes, that you can put in and it'll help you turn off the unneeded APIs.
What's an API?
Access Protocol Interface is what it is.
Application programming interface.
There we go, Application Programming Interface. It's to allow other programs to interface with your WordPress websites. Is basically what it is. It's the same stuff that allows my phone to interface with Google and give me a live stream right now.
Do you turn off APIs from the dashboard, or is that somewhere else you do it?
You got to either add code to it, put a plugin in that allows you to go in and check which ones to turn off. There's a security plugin I recently reviewed, and I can't remember the name of it. It has some really good, easy settings for turning off the majority of the APIs you need. The heartbeat control, things like that on the WordPress website, turn it off or tone it so it's only usable on the pages it's needed. So there's a whole lot of things in there. Okay, the other is to remove unused plugins and themes. Something many people forget to do. They're building their website, they're testing themes, they load, no, I don't like this one, they load another theme, oh, no, they load another theme. Pretty soon they've got 15 themes in there, they're using one, they never remove all the others. Same with plugins, they're adding, removing, nothing wrong with that. You want it until you get it working. When you go live with your website and you're at your final launch, every plugin that is not activated needs to be deleted, every theme that is not activated needs to be deleted. The biggest reason for this is it's like leaving a massive door in your website that hackers can use. And they'll get in that door and you'll never know they came through that door. Because the plugin is inactive or the theme is inactive, they can get in there and mess with it as much as they want and it won't impact the way your website runs. And once they get in there, then they can get to the other parts of your site. I've seen it many times. They come through an inactive plugin or an inactive theme. So you want to get rid of any inactive, because if it's an active plugin or theme, they get in there and mess with the code, it'll usually break your website, tipping you off that somebody's messing with things. So that's what you want to do to help prevent things from happening to your site. So, it's just not cooperating now. All right, so much for my fancy clicker. So what do? You've been hacked. Now what? First thing you do is stop and breathe. Second, don't panic, carry a towel. That went by, everyone. How many? It's that staying. I got Sherry Lynn, and I know it's a Hitchhiker's Galaxy Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. All right. First thing to do is, one, stop and breathe. Don't panic. It's not going to get much worse than it already is. What you need to do is, first, if you can handle it yourself by starting and downloading a copy of the hacked website immediately. Get it downloaded onto a storage device. And you might ask, why would I download the hacked website? Well, you'll want to get it at its current state, because worst case scenario, you can use that to rebuild from. Okay? Once you've done that, downloaded the hacked website, plus it's another way you can also use that to examine the route they got into your website and how they hacked you. Once you've downloaded it, you've got a backup, hopefully, a recent one, hopefully. Delete all the files and the database, and then redeploy your most recent backup. Now from this point, you have to do some work, because if they hacked you, redeploying your backup means that back door that they used to get in your site is now back for them. So now you got to go in and spend some time figuring out how they got in and plugging the hole. So you do have to do that, or you have to hire someone like me to do that. That's one of the things I do. It's usually not cheap to get it done. It's usually anywhere from a low of 2 hours to a high of 20 hours to get a hacked website fixed and restored. If you don't have backups or good quality backups, that time climbs increasingly, because there's a whole lot of small things that have to be done to restore a website. I had a client like that for me. I'd worked on their sites about 3 or 4 years ago, and because I keep all backups I ever made, I kept all the backups of the sites, because when I finish building a website and doing it, I take one final backup of an actively functioning website, so I have a copy of clean, fresh files. And she came back to me 2 years later because her website had been hacked. Not just the one, but she had four websites, all in the same account. Every one of them had been hacked. And they made such a mess in there, and she didn't have good backups. Her hosting provider backups were useless. Absolutely useless. And so what happened was I took what she had, and I took the files I had that were 2 years old, and I pieced back her website and made it work. And she needed it because that was her main business, was up there. And that's one of the big problems. Especially if it's your main business, your backup should be priority one. If it's your main source of income and business.
What kind of people or websites do the hackers go after?
Everybody. Doesn't matter. They don't want your data most of the time. Most of the time, they're not after your data. Your data's not that valuable. But what is valuable? Your bandwidth, your website's ability to send out spam email, your website's ability to host phishing files, your website's ability to use your website to launch more attacks on other places. So there's much more to using your website than just collecting your data. And you had another question?
Actually, it was very similar. When you said make a mess of it, I wanted to know what form the mess took.
Oh, well, we're going to talk about that mess, the
Yeah.
form the mess takes here in a minute.
Cool.
More? Okay. Okay. This is where you run into problems. Most websites restored from backup, that's the best way. Backups may be too old, as I was discussing. You've got problems with old files, new files. The biggest problem is having no backup. And at some point you may hit a point where you're going to have to call in a professional to do the work for you and save you a heck of a lot of time. Now before I go into this, I know I've discussed this. Oh yeah, it's in this next one. Okay. Other issues. This is making a mess of your website. Other issues that happen, how you recover from other issues of your website. One of the biggest ones that happens with WordPress is the white screen of death. Everyone here, have you experienced the white screen of death? We only got a couple of hands. Okay. The white screen of death is what is compared to the old blue screen of death in Windows. If you've been around Windows for any length of time, you will have encountered the blue screen of death at least once. WordPress has an issue, what's known as the white screen of death. You do an update, you add a new plugin, you make a change somewhere, and all of a sudden, poof, you've got a white screen. Nothing. You can't do a thing to the website. You can't back up, you can't get back in, it seems like it's gone. In truth, it's not. The first time it occurs to you might be a massive panic. I've had a few clients that the first time it occurred, I get this crazy phone call in massive panic. And I was like, relax, because they think their website vanished completely. It hasn't. What happened is it's run a bad piece of code and it doesn't know what to do and it just goes, and it panics and it throws up a white screen. Now, with the next version of WordPress, they were going to put in some code that would prevent the white screen of death, but they found out by creating that code, they were opening up a massive security hole in the process. So they backed off that until they can figure out how to implement it. So I'm really hoping they do. It's really going to be a nice feature. But at the moment, the white screen of death, the only way to fix it is what did you do last? Is remember the last thing you did. Did you activate a plugin? Did you update a plugin? Did you update a theme? What did you do? Because that makes it easier if you call a professional like me and you say, oh, the last thing I did was I updated the plugin that I think it was for my contact something. And say, okay, perfect. FTP information, I can get in, hit that one item, and within half an hour, website's fixed. If you don't know what you did, I don't know what you did, that requires troubleshooting, testing many things and guessing to see what caused it. Because it doesn't put an error anywhere, it doesn't write an error into a file anywhere. It's a magical problem. So it's really not a big problem to recover from, you just got to FTP in or go through the cPanel to reset some things in the code. Spam attacks, this is one of the big messes that spammers do to the websites. This is what they go after for data. Or not data, why they hack your website. They use your website to launch spam email attacks. They use your website for pharma injections. That pharmaceutical spam, Viagra, blue pills, get this and get that. All that spam you get in your mail, the 10,000 emails I get a month for multiple things. It's like, why am I even getting this? But those emails are often sent from hacked websites because it makes it impossible to shut them down. Because the hacked website gets shut down, they just move on to the next website and continue sending the spam. The pharma injections, these are for SEO spam. If you've ever clicked on a link and suddenly it bounces you to Viagra website of some sort, that's a pharma injection. They do that on your WordPress website. They'll do that invisibly. You'll have your website seem like it's working perfectly and suddenly you'll get notifications from Google, your website has been hacked. You go, well, it's all working fine. It's all behind the scenes. And it takes hours to clean up that hack. Broken websites. Again, this falls into the white screen of death. You can break a website without it going white screen. You can add a plugin. I was recently working on a site. I added a plugin, and all of a sudden, all my font layouts and everything else, all this perfect layout just went sideways. And all of a sudden, I had an ugly. I was like, turn off the plugin, works fine. Turns out the plugin was injecting some CSS that was overriding the default CSS, so it was making a mess. They poorly written plugin, creating problems. Phishing folders. They love to be able to use people's websites, and you know what I'm talking about phishing folders. Phishing, you've got the phishing email, you get the email, say, we're from the Bank of Montreal to user. You, user, Bank of Montreal, your account has been used, and you're like, they always send me an email with my name, or you realize it's a false, and if you mouse over, you see the link goes to somebody's domain name, subfolder, subfolder, subfolder. That's a phishing folder. If they can get on your website, this is where having insecure 777 files comes into play. They find one of those, they'll load on their phishing files on your website.
Insecure 777.
777 is a term for property settings on the security settings on a folder or file in a web server. I have no other way to describe it. Cindy.
Yeah, basically, the server's supposed to get permissions. Other trusted things are supposed to get permissions, and the general world at large is supposed to get permissions. And things like images, everyone's supposed to get.
Yeah.
But things like access to tweak out like a PHP file or something really critical, only the server should get. So these rights kind of give you everything from can you read it, can you write it, can you execute it. And if you can't, and if you create too little a set of rights, the 777, then it says, oh, anyone who shows up can do anything
Yeah.
to this particular file. And if they get the credentials to push in, then they can just do anything.
They just push them right in there.
Yeah.
And phishing files, I've actually, it hasn't happened to me in years. Many years ago, one of my websites was hacked, and I can't remember the bank's name, somewhere in Europe. It was a false bank. I got an email from the bank about this before, they knew about it before I knew about the problem. Because their security department notified me, and I had to fix my site. And since then, I've been more careful on my website. That was years ago, somewhere around 10 years ago it happened to me. So it can happen to anyone. So it's something you gotta be aware of.
So with, if you don't wanna set your permissions for your PHP files at 777, what is a typical permission setting?
Default is 644 for all file names, and, no, 644 for
Files,
Files
755 for PHP and executables.
65, yeah.
And that 7 says the server can do everything.
Yeah.
The group can read them and execute them, which says you can see what's there and you can run the code in it. And the world at large, same thing. The 5 means you can see what's in there, so you can see the output and you can run the code in there. It doesn't let you write, which says you can open the file in some way and put in malicious stuff. That's that difference.
There's a difference. There's a lot to it, and the default settings for a long time, to get things done, you had to make a directory 777. And they stopped doing that. They realized the insecurity of it when the hackers came alive about 10 or 15 years ago. And over the last 10 years, they've slowly been educating everyone to never use that permission, but it still happens occasionally. It's not as severe a problem as it used to be. I mean, I go back 5 years when I gave presentations like this. It wasn't uncommon to log into a WordPress website and find a third of the directories in there were 777. Just massively insecure. And it was just default settings, the way servers were set up. And they finally fixed those problems. So for the most part, it's not a problem anymore. So those are some of the big things you can do. And recovering from them is just a matter of time and work and knowing where to go hunt. And if you don't know where to go hunt, that's where you want to hunt down a professional. Now, to keep aware of this information, this is a list of some websites that you can check out that I actually follow. I get their newsletters on a regular basis, and this helps me keep ahead of the articles and the things that are happening, the security holes that have recently breached that were just notified, and the hackers are just finding out same time I'm finding out, which means I can get ahead of them. You know, since I'm not part of the background security teams. One of the good places to go is WP Tavern. They got some really good news there. ZDNet.com. The Hacker News. These guys are great for providing news about what's happening in the hacker community. WP White Security. This is a website that's dedicated to just WordPress security issues. WordFence, again, WordFence.com puts out posts sometimes ahead of other security companies about security holes. They discover them, and as soon as they realize it's okay to notify the public, they will. One of the things that happens when a security team notifies or finds a security hole, they try to contact the plugin developer, or if it's a core problem in WordPress, they contact WordPress, and they get them to patch it before they announce it to the public. Mainly because the hackers might not know about this hole yet. And if they announce it to the public before it's patched, they give the hackers a head start, and they don't want to do that. So they try to keep it under wraps until a patch has been released. But WordFence is good. Another thing WordFence is really good for is they let people know about abandoned plugins. And this one's becoming more of an issue now. And WordPress itself, in the repository for WordPress, there is now close to 70,000 plugins. When I first started WordPress, there was less than 9,000 plugins for it. A lot of the plugins that were written for WordPress were written between 3 and 5 years ago. And they were written by college students at the time. And these college students were basically learning how to code. WordPress was growing. It was a great place to get their name known, test the waters, get out a plugin. Well, they got these plugins out. They're very useful. They're used by a few 100,000 people or a few thousand people. And what happened was these college students graduate college. They get offered a job at Microsoft or Google or whatever, making 150, 200,000 a year. Oh, I don't need this plugin, and they just abandon it. And it stays there, and nobody picks it up and does anything with it, and it sits there. And after 3 or 4 years, what the code they wrote years ago now has security holes in it that were not known at the time. The holes are known now. So what happens is WordFence is really good about letting people know, because their software is monitoring so many websites. They get a look at this stuff. And then there's Code NWP, another great place to get code information.
If you had to choose just one or two of those, which ones do you think would be the best?
I would stay with Hacker News and WordFence myself. But I'm subscribed to all of them. I'm not inundated with emails from them. They don't send out daily. Some of them only send out once a month. Some only send out when it's an emergency or when it's something new.
So you just subscribe to the.
I just subscribe to their newsletter. It comes in my email. I'm subscribed to, these are my top ones. I'm subscribed to about 30 or 40.
Must be a lot to read.
I just skim it. You read the headlines.
Yeah.
You read the headlines that come through. No, if I had to read everything that came through, I'd never be able to do anything else. I tried that once. If I went just one day and just read my email, that's all I do for 8 hours. Is just read my email. Which is why sometimes emails get lost. People email me and it's like days later I'm going down, so, oh, I forgot this. Email, I'm sorry, I got lost in my inbox. Most people understand. All right, that's it. Any other questions for me? No? Yes,
What's your company called?
johnoverall.com. And WP Plugins A to Z. But johnoverall.com. I do business as John Overall, so. Okay, well, thank you very much. And we'll have Dean up here shortly if you see him. Dean, is that you, Dean? Yeah, okay. Sorry to sneak in, but I didn't get a face to the name.
That's okay. Width is another good
Okay, we'll take a quick break here while Dean comes up and sets himself up.
WHIP gets a width.
And have you seen mine?
No. It's super good. No, fast. But I don't have to use a computer. It's WP behind it. But it's
You said you had a
that's
story
the
for
only
your
one I
HDMI
get.
port.
I'm not as much of a security guy.
Stay in the loop.
That's all right.
It is, and I it just comes in and I'm just like, oh, okay, that's.
Probably. I might have one in the car somewhere far away.
Oh, we got a couple of minutes. I gotta
Yeah, like here's today.
give myself a little bit.
I have a question. So if you see Google Analytics, you can see somebody using a page in your website that doesn't exist. It's
Yeah.
H slash and then a number. And so,
Usually if there's a
what is
news
that?
item that tracks
It could be something that one of your plugins is using, like I had a plugin that created a false page with that, like that. Or it could be a spam attack on your site, and they could be trying to inject something through that, or just siphon off traffic.
so I found that this page of the website was being created all over the world. Like it went from Addis Ababa to Jakarta to.
That's something you probably should be investigating, because I don't have an answer for that off the top of my head.
So I just blocked those countries. I blocked those countries.
Yeah, you can do that.
Absolutely, you get rid of it.
Yeah, I know.
You get rid of all these places. Return to what we used to do.
My parents didn't come into the city council or the small town of Washington State. It's just the only case I think it's kind of going up to put things out first. It's so frustrating.
yet.
You
Uh,
film
did-
yourself live?
What's that?
You do a live stream?
Yeah, it's live streaming still. I just leave it running.
How's it going?
It's going good, how are you?
Good, man.
Yeah,
What's happening in your world?
Not much, just lots of bits and pieces.
Okay.
Last weekend, I kind of used family day inadvertently to catch up. And I've almost got caught up.
I worked family day too.
Yeah, so I'm there, there's like today's work was dealt with today, it's like
Okay,
pretty
yeah.
small.
I hit inbox 0 for like 30 seconds today, it was pretty amazing.
I actually,
Never get there.
inbox 0, yeah, well, my proper inbox is, I think I cracked it with 10,000 and said I gotta stop. Cause somebody leaned in to me a while back and she actually had a full on fit, she's like, I see like you have 1,400 unread emails, how can you do that? It's like,
Oh, do you just ignore them and just move
well,
your
there's like,
archive
you know,
or anything?
there's like newsletter crap that I haven't corralled yet, so that happens.
And my wife's that way, she just picks them all,
Yeah.
picks the one she wants.
Yeah, and other people who delete stuff when they,
Yeah.
oh, I've dealt with it, I've deleted it, it's like,
Mhm.
why did you need that next week?
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, that's life. So it's okay, things have been busy, but it's alright, the snow kind of knocked me for a bit of a
Oh,
week.
yeah, that was.
It was just
Day
annoying.
was fun, and then the next 2 days were.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, overall things are alright.
Make websites before WordPress
Yeah.
came on the scene.
Well, I haven't heard a thing from our friends at Guelph, Ontario with Valley Connect, so I'm
okay.
just, I'm moving on to another.
I'm good with where you can wait, I'm used to it, right? I had one, somebody today, he said, yeah, this thing, I guess, I got a manual last week, it was happening, and today's like, here it is. And, between me and the fence posts, the people upstream for funding this, was trying to handle it, and that's what happened. And yesterday I saw a YouTube video about how evil Trans Canada is, it's like, this feels really unfortunate. But I can take the money. Hey, good job.
Yeah,
It was a great talk.
a little, yeah,
I always pick up things every time.
okay, so,
If you pick up one thing, it's always worth it.
Yeah.
So I've always looked at it.
I'm gonna be more stringent, I always come away from it, like,
Yeah.
programming like a slob. So,
I use 777 on everything.
yeah, that's how it all works, it's like,
I
why
miss
is
the days of 777, I really do.
why does the card go work 4, it's work 9 only?
I actually was.
I actually miss the days, the early days when everything was wide open.
Yeah.
And everything was light.
Blasted, you know.
I miss that.
Oh, yeah, the email component.
I enjoyed it. It made it so much easier to do stuff.
Yeah.
I took a block trip to the past today with that Google server, and it's like, oh my god, why is this not working? And it's amazing.
yeah.
You should see the
Maybe.
bar counts.
Yeah.
I'm pretty
Well,
sure we get
I
there.
wanna
Nice.
just post, see if I can learn.
We've gone through,
I do my own
made additional notations and retweaked all
back
that.
end
I
stuff
think
for the
we can
most part,
probably
but
solve
I don't
that
really
flower.
understand it.
That plugin there, it feels like we can spit it out.
Often how
Any
it's
sort
set
of
up
account,
to
right?
work, it's like,
Yeah.
you know, you know what to use the terms and
Yeah.
conditions and
Yeah.
backup
Yeah.
lights, but, you know, they just.
Yeah, the back end admin,
Use your iPad.
not tricky to
Yeah.
add.
You get where you're going,
Yeah.
most of the time.
It's a nice plugin.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote part of the, I inherited the code years ago, then I rewrote some, of it, then I added code years ago. It's like I've been doing it for 6 years.
Well, I had
And last year, I was
yeah,
like,
I
yes, they just
actually
didn't want to
do
spend money last year.
got a
Well, next year, you're gonna have to spend money.
back
No choice.
Yeah,
If you
because it was
And I do,
freaking out over like deprecating code, so without money, it was just not gonna run.
And that's what I told them, this year they went, okay, spend money, I said, okay, that's what it's gonna cost. And they
I
went,
do a lot of work.
okay,
Super Bowl.
they kind of choked a little, but.
Yeah.
Well,
Push our hardest to pay
Yes,
for it, it's not
yeah,
like we don't have
yeah.
money.
Yeah.
We raise money for street youth.
This is also
This
true.
is the 21st year this event's been
Come on,
running.
guys.
Oh, this is the flower count in the city where they.
So I really
Yeah.
haven't
I've
been-
been doing their website for years.
Oh.
I went way back there and found
She's
6
so
billion
busy
flowers.
that-
6 billion.
The
Yeah.
thing is,
All of it,
in that-
and other things, you know, like silent
for the last few
treatment,
years,
we're
it
gonna
wouldn't
look
accept
back
anything
and
more than
put
8
them in
digits.
and, you know,
Yeah.
their-
Oh.
You know, in the online,
that
they
their
couldn't
link,
insert
their
more than 8
website
digits,
and all that
period.
kind of stuff.
And then,
So I
when
get
it
back
got
in
to
there
counts,
and
it
I
was
think
they
a link
inserted
to
that's
where
not
the
8.
sponsor for
The
the.
code itself,
Yeah.
after.
Yeah, yeah. So I,
would
that's
choke
the
on
stuff I
Yeah.
use. That's it.
Yeah.
She'll do anything.
And of course,
that
it was a legacy.
Lately,
It was
we've been having
written,
some really
it was
weird
written
issues.
6, 7 years ago.
I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God, we gotta
And
figure out what it is,
it used to be a
because
function.
we're only a month from the event.
What day does it happen? Is there a day?
Yeah, it
In the
starts,
summer,
no,
no,
it starts on
of
March 6th
more
or
time,
13th.
but
Okay.
a
Which
month
is why
before
I
the
was on the
event, we
deadline.
really.
Yeah.
Of course, they
I
never
heard
come
it,
talk,
I was like,
they
yeah.
never come talk to me until the
That's
second or
something
third week of
Oh.
February and say, we need this in 2 weeks. It's like,
It's designed.
Yeah.
no, I don't have emails.
Yeah, well,
The only
the
thing I
charity
think
event,
about
they used to post, it was set up ages ago before I.
Now, we sent them emails back in December
Started using
saying, you guys
Google,
want to do
so I
something?
guess we're sticking to it for now, and then,
The second week of February. Yeah, of course, you wait until you
I
get
just
that.
actually went through,
Yep.
step four.
And the section that's.
Yeah, and they've done that every year.
I started with him.
And the
to
two,
do
three,
help
it
do
was
that.
3 years ago when I had
And
to
in the
rewrite
end,
and create additional
Things
forms.
kind of
for it.
shifted in how I was
And I
dealing with my
I had
business,
actually figured
so.
Oh, no.
Things fixed up a lot,
that
so
Google.
we cleaned up a lot of things.
Even Google doesn't
You know,
help because
fixed
it's
up
never
some
precise for your
secured
problem.
this
What I know about
and
Philip,
all that.
and
So
what
I
I
just
got
had it all
back to
done.
my reason, is
So
that
hopefully,
somebody else's
and I
problem
switched my hosting
is usually
from,
the case.
my, a
Yeah.
friend of mine in Vancouver had a hosting,
If you
but he
can
doesn't really
understand
manage it
what
very
they're
well,
doing.
he's on to other things.
The problem is I can
But he
understand
was
what
just
they're
saying,
doing.
and every time I had something go wrong, I'd go, oh my God, I'd text on call, and he'd go in and fix it, but
Right, but it was
there were
like
still
you
issues,
have
there was, it was loading really slowly. So I just switched it over, I pay a lot of money monthly, but he also handles, just monitors the security.
All right, you ready, Dean?
So other than, I've been.
Ready?
Next chapter.
Oh, sorry, sorry, over here. That's okay. I'm looking the wrong way. Go ready? Okay.
Well, you might at least.
But I
That's still
run
running live?
quite a bit,
Okay.
yeah, to be on his, yeah, and he says, you know what?
Hey, everyone.
It's probably bigger than you need, but.
Let's carry this on, give me a chance to give a great presentation. Crap, right? Crap. The last name, Dean? Oh, Bennett. Bennett, yes. Okay, this is Dean Bennett, he's from CompuServe. CompuTech. CompuTech. I got the Compu part right.
Yeah.
From CompuTech, and he's here to talk to us about using email programs and some of the pitfalls and benefits of them, right?
Yeah.
All right.
All
So
right.
welcome, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So just a little background about me. I've basically been in IT since '93, so it's a long time. Had a computer store for about 10 years. Back when the 4633 megahertz computer was the fastest thing out there. And I was doing upgrades and that, so I had to serve for 10 years, and I went and just gone to specifically for business. So most of mine are business clients, and with business clients, security is quite important. So having good email systems is very critical, because if you don't have that, information can get lost or go to the wrong place, which you don't want, and it can create problems. So there's basically 3 different kind of email systems out there, and I don't know how familiar everybody is with email systems. Everyone knows all of them, right?
Probably.
Yeah. Can I get 2 volunteers to come up?
Alright, why not?
Okay. So, I'm gonna,
This will be fun.
yeah, I'm gonna be the server.
Okay.
And so we're gonna want you to be the email sender and one to be the recipient, right?
I'll receive.
You'll receive, yes.
Send.
Send and receive. So I've got some envelopes here which are basically fake emails. So the first system is, yeah, go ahead and take one.
Okay.
Is the POP system. And POP is called Post Office Protocol. It's the oldest one out there. So people still use a lot. But it's basically just like your postman. So the mail comes from the sender,
Send it in.
goes to the server, goes to there. Typically, the default is that it's wiped off the server, so once it's in his hand, it's gone. It's just sitting on that computer, and that's the only place it is. There is an option in programs to let it stay on the server, so if you do that, there's a copy sitting there. But then if he goes and logs into another computer, he gets the other email. He still has them once sitting on both machines, but there's no synchronization, so if he deletes one off one computer, it's still sitting on the other one. So with POP, it's a very limited system. It's okay if it's a small client who's gonna just have like one computer and check their emails on a regular basis, but it's a very limited system. So the other one that came around afterwards is called IMAP. And what IMAP does is it has some synchronization to it. So if an email gets sent out, send goes off to the server, yeah. So they both go off the server. Then what happens is one stays in the server, the other one goes to the client. Now we both have emails, and the folders are synchronized and matching. The only difference is that when an email is been sent out or changed, it's got to exchange information between the two of us. So just tear off the little corner of that envelope. Yep. So that's an email header. So that header gets sent back to the server to check to see if the email exists on the server or not. If it doesn't, it's wiped off. So if he deletes an email, it's going to check the header on the server, take it off the server. So every single email and folder winds up having this little transaction going back and forth. Not the entire email, just the header on it. So there's a lot of data. So if somebody's got a gigabyte emails and you have IMAP, they're going to be complaining that, God, every time I open my email system, it's really slow to sync anything. They have to click the other folder. When they click that folder, then it starts the synchronization process again. So it really slows it down. So the only advantage with IMAP is if you have a small amount of emails, if you send an email off like from one device, it will sync it to the sent folder in the other devices. So that's where the advantage of IMAP came in, and the folders were all synchronized. But because of this little header transaction, as soon as you start getting a lot of emails, it just slows it right down. So it's not the best. So the next one going on there is with Exchange Server. And with Exchange Server, the email gets sent off, it goes off to the client, it stays on the server, both. What happens is now there's a database, and that database resides on the client, resides on the server. All it has to do is check the consistency between those two databases. So you could have 25 gigabytes of email sitting on the client's computer and on the server, but in order to sync the two together, all it has to do is to say, well, there's a difference in the database of this particular part. That's the emails that we need to synchronize between the two of them. So it's a lot quicker, a lot faster. The other advantage is that it goes beyond just syncing emails themselves. You can now synchronize contacts, tasks, your calendars. Everything is synchronized between the server and the client. So for instance, Office 365 is just Exchange Server. If you have a phone, or if you have a laptop and you have a desktop computer and you're running Outlook and all those, basically you can synchronize all your calendars, all your contacts, everything between all the systems on it. The other thing is security. Now there's different Exchange servers out there, there's different systems offered, but Microsoft is the main one. And with that, you can actually control the devices. So let's say we have an employee who's gotten disgruntled and leaves the company. You can actually go to his device, remove his email account right off his device. So he no longer has access to email. So there's more control with it. Whereas if you had a POP or IMAP account, they would keep getting emails until you turn around and went and changed the password. And they would still reside all the emails on their system. With the Exchange one, it'll actually remove them off. So it's a lot more intelligence behind it. It is more complex to set up. And I'll get into a bit of information on that. Thank you. So primarily with most of my clients, I set them up with Exchange Server. If they have a SHA or TELUS what email, get them off it. That's all I can say. SHA or TELUS.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny, I'll see business cards, going out there, and I'll just pass mine around for you guys on it. And I'll see business clients, have a professional company, they have some, email that's SHA or TELUS, stuck on it. Their main focus is to provide internet services. They're not really an email client. TELUS has a lot of limitations. For a while, they had only 8-character passwords were allowed on it. If you had a phone, an address book in, it was allowed like up to 20 addresses. They've expanded a bit on what their systems are, but they're really limited. So I always say, get rid of them, go to something that supports like an Exchange format, which Gmail now supports Exchange, and so does Hotmail, or Windows Live supports Exchange. So if they don't want to spend the money on the Exchange server, go to there. If you go to Microsoft Exchange though, you're taking a better step, because now you can get the domain name to coincide with the email address. So if it's johnsmith.com, then you can have like sales@johnsmith.com is together. You're not having like a company called John Smith Sales and then you have a Hotmail address or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a lot more professional. The cost of it is about $5 per email address, but you can do aliases. So you can have, for instance, I've got, mine's computech.ca and I have info@computech.ca, but I also have service@computech.ca. And I don't pay for 2 email addresses. The service one's an alias to it. So if people email me at service@computech.ca, it'll just forward right to my inbox, my info. So you can add on aliases to one email address. So that saves you, saves cost on the company. So the other thing that I like about the Microsoft Exchange system on it is the management, because in the management console you can add, subtract users, you can remove devices. There's also two-step verification, which is like Gmail. So if somebody logs into the web page, they actually have to get a text code on the phone. The text code would authenticate them to log in into that web page for the email, and it's a lot more secure. Whereas you get something like SHA or TELUS, that's not going to happen. You're not going to get two-step on there. So if somebody hacks your password, you're in. You have no idea. So with WordPress and setting up these email systems by default, if you're doing a domain, they automatically set you up with whatever that domain is for a standard POP account or IMAP account on it. But when you get into Exchange now, you're now using an outside service to do it. So you're using like Microsoft, or you're using somebody else. Like in the States, there's a few companies that support Exchange. I won't get into the names of all of them, there's quite a few out there. And to use those ones, you now have to change the DNS records on it. So you gotta go into the WordPress site, change the DNS records, and modify those on your, not the WordPress site, sorry, in the control panel of the actual site, and change those records to match what's on the, what's provided by Microsoft, because they will actually send all these DNS records out. You got to copy those DNS records, go back into the control panel for your website, and then modify those DNS records to match. And that's where it gets kind of technical. And it doesn't happen right away, it can take up to 24 hours. So if you're doing a production, let's say you've got somebody who's changing email systems or changing domain name, you have to keep one of them running in the background, and then start the new one, get it going, and then once everything is working, then transfer them over, because it could take a day for it to propagate and for the DNS servers to get recognized. And I think everybody here knows what DNS servers are, right? Okay. Okay. Does anyone don't know what DNS server is? Okay. So DNS server, we got to think of as, let's say you have a street address, okay, and the street address is, for instance, 729 Crave Street, right? And it's on a map here, 729 Crave Street, and you kind of just know, oh, okay, it's because it's on the map. But to the rest of the world, the way it's recognized is it's at longitude and latitude, so you use those numbers, for instance, to say where it's actually located. So what a DNS domain name server does, it translates. So it turns around and translates that address. So for instance, my website might be 24.168.192.25. That's my website real address, okay? It's not Computech.ca. So what it does is it translates that name, when you type in Computech, it translates that name to that IP address, which refers it to the website and directs you to there. So it's basically saying, okay, the longitude and latitude for that website is now here. So when you have, with these email systems, it's the same thing. It's saying that now this email resides now on this server here. Here's its DNS addresses. So you have to go in and change those records and point all the DNS addresses, with C names, the text names, everything, to that server. So all the mail that comes through that's going to that domain name now gets redirected to that outside server. And it comes back. Am I losing people, or no? So with when you're setting up a site, the first thing is that you'll get the site done, you get it hosted, and then you're going to have access to the cPanel for that site. When you set up the Exchange account, you're going to go in and initiate the Exchange account, and when you first set up, like through Microsoft to the cloud, so it's through office.com, it's going to come back up and it's going to ask you for the domain name, which you put in. It's going to have a verified code. So typically what will happen is you'll have to go to DNS records, you'll have to put a special code in there. When Microsoft can see that, it turns around and authenticates and says, yep, you're valid. Okay, we'll continue on. Now we'll give you a bunch of other DNS records that you have to put in. And once you put those in, then you have to authenticate those ones and verify them. And it's a kind of a three-step process, because you have to go through that, get those verified, and once it's all done and set, the records are set in there, then it starts working. Your email now transitions from wherever it was before, straight through to that email server, and you can set up your devices. With the nice thing about Exchange too is when you're using Microsoft products like the Mail client or Outlook, The only two things you need is the email address and the password, and that's it. All the rest, all your stuff like your incoming, outgoing servers, you don't have to worry about that. That's not something you deal with Exchange, that's automatically set by it. The only thing you'd have to do is on a phone, you might have to put the server, which for Office 365, it's outlook.office365.com. So you might just have to add that record into your phone when you're setting it up on a mobile device. But the rest is pretty transparent on it. I was going to actually show you DNS record setup here in a second. I guess my projector battery's dead. Sorry. Okay. I have a little projector on this I was going to show it to you, but it's not there. That's fine. So, back here. Oh, something over there. Still. No, it's not turning on. I haven't charged it in a while. All right. So much for projector. Anyone has any questions about the Exchange process? Okay. So the other thing is email security. With Exchange, everything's encrypted on it. That's just an automatic. When you have POP and IMAP, the other two older ones, it's optional. So by default, a lot of POP comments are not encrypted. And you got to think that when the data is being transmitted through, there's no encryption and it could be tapped into. So just think of having the old system of talking between two people and having a couple tin cans and a piece of string between them. And the other person ties their can onto your string and they can now hear what you're saying as it goes through. If it's encrypted, that's not. It's just going to be garbled information on it. So if you are going to use an old system like IMAP or POP, make sure you're using the SSL on it, which is going to encrypt all the data going through. So it'll be typically the SSL on the incoming and then SSL or TSL on the outgoing servers. So I strongly recommend to change it over to get it encrypted. Passwords, that's one thing I always tell clients, like don't use your dog's name or something like that, or 123 whatever, because those are guessed right away. Don't use whole words, period. Mix up the numbers, letters into a whole word if you're going to use one. Make sure that you've got other special characters into it. With Exchange account, you can allow clients to change their own name. You can actually put a policy in there and say, okay, we have to have so many characters into it. You have to uppercase, lowercase, you got to have numbers and a special character. So you can set all those parameters that it has to coincide with that, or they're not going to allow to change the password in it. And with and password too on Exchange, you're not allowed to have the username as part of it. So if I had, let's say, I got a website called deanbennett.ca, it's a photographer want to do. I couldn't have Dean1234, it just wouldn't allow it. It's just going to say, no, it doesn't qualify, but I could have D3AN or something like that, or D5N or something, and it will allow it, but just your username cannot match your password at all. If you got a very basic account like the Shard tells, yeah, they'll let you do it. And I have seen passwords that are actually like password 123 on there, so it gets very simplistic. And with Exchange and stuff, when you're using that too, the best client is Outlook on it. If you have to transition somebody on there, you can download what's called the PST file, and the PST file contains the contacts, the calendars, the emails, everything in one single file, and you can upload that into the cloud. So it's a very easy way to transition through from one system to another on it. So I have taken clients who are on a system that had an IMAP or a POP account and transitioned to Exchange by just using Outlook and grabbing that PST file, creating the Outlook Exchange account onto it, and then just uploading the whole thing through Outlook. So it's a pretty smooth way to go. So that's my spiel on email. Definitely, getting the email on Exchange is the way to go because then it matches domain name, it's professional looking. You still can do that when you use an IMAP account, but you're going to have the processes once the email's built up in there, it's going to slow the system right down. You're not going to sync your contacts or anything. So there's, the advantage of IMAP isn't that great. But if it's a small client and it's one person, then they might be willing to work with it. They want to pay the $5 a month. But for me, it's $5 a month. It's a no-brainer. site.
I usually host my emails in cPanel on the server. I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
Well, so when you're hosting ones in cPanel, they're basically being hosted with that service provider. So they're typically set as a POP or an IMAP when they're on there.
Only options.
So my host server has a system on there.
Yeah, mail server built into it, typically. If you go to GoDaddy, they actually subcontract the Exchange server through them, and you can actually, it's pretty easy to set up the Exchange server when you go through somebody like GoDaddy.
Does Google have an Exchange set up similar?
Well, they have now for Gmail,
Okay.
but they have a business one, so there's business Google services. I personally don't recommend it, and the reason is that Google has their own way of doing things. You actually have to download a client, install the client app on the computer. That becomes now the interface for the Outlook on it. It's a little bit of a complex setup. I've seen it break one too many times. The other problem I've seen with it is that they'll turn around and by default, they used to limit it to 1 gig of emails, and my clients will phone me up and say, hey, it stopped working. The app got updated, it reset back to 1 gig limit, it said unlimited, and then I stopped getting emails on it.
It sounds as though you're very much in favour of the Microsoft.
Yeah, also tech support, I've had Google where I phone them like 3 days later, they'll call me back. And, you know, with Microsoft, there's actually, right in the admin interface, you can log into the support console, you can type in your question, and then click on call me and they'll phone you within like 10 minutes typically, so it's pretty good for the service side of it.
So just so I'm clear, you're kind of suggesting you think it's one of the best options would be to go with like a Microsoft Exchange server?
Yes, probably.
Connect your server to them and just.
Yeah, there's in-house hosted servers, so if you've got a big company like the government, they're gonna have their own Exchange server in-house. So that's the whole computer system that does the same thing as what the cloud systems do, but unless you've got probably, I'd say 25 employees or higher, I would stick with the cloud. I did one company last year that was 80 employees, and we still went with the cloud-based server.
Microsoft Cloud?
Yeah.
They've not been pushing it. Why haven't I heard of this?
Well, they have like Office 365 has been pushed out there. It's the applications, but they also integrate the Exchange with it. So you can buy a Office 365 account that's got the Exchange on it, and it has the Office apps together as a package. So you can get, and typically it's like 25 gigs of emails included. So it's
Love email.
yeah, and the server farms for Microsoft, if anybody knows, there's 6 in Canada now, the size of a football field each. They're huge.
One more question, sorry. In the context of like small businesses, do you think it's worth going to a server like Microsoft? Or
Yeah. I mean, it's $5 a month, right? You know,
Okay.
yeah, and if you can turn around and send a quote off to a client, and on your phone or your home computer, and then turn around on your phone, look that quote up to them, and then you also have their contact information synchronized. You know, it's just kind of a no-brainer. You've got all that information right there, where you might turn around and say, oh yeah, I got to contact or call, you know, John Smith, I got a quote for him, but you don't have that on your phone because it's sitting on your home desktop computer, so.
So it's just way more robust anyway.
Yeah, it is. If you go with a Hotmail account, you can kind of get those, you know, synchronize it with an Exchange or a Gmail, but but with the Exchange, it's just way better. I use the tasks and notes personally. Like I have tech notes, and it's synchronized with an app on my phone. I can look up, you know, jobs and stuff like that. So, thanks.
So with the aliasing, you said that you could alias like an info for John Smith.
Yeah.
Can you go sort of the other way of having one alias resolved to multiple email addresses?
Multiple email addresses?
Yeah, because I've got that where it's like contact at Sean DeWolf goes to 2 people.
Yeah.
And so and those 2 people have their own email accounts.
Yeah, so you can do forwarding and add
Okay,
forwards into
so the forwards can go, one forward can go to multiple
Yeah.
recipients, okay.
Yeah.
Second question is, you've talked a lot about Exchange, but I've had some experience with G Suite and I don't like it.
No.
And I mean, it sounds like you're not really keen on
No.
either. What's your take on G Suite apart from it's just not that swift?
It's just that it's not a true Exchange server, so they have their own app. They're still using the Gmail system. That's like the basic Gmail that's out there, and that's why. So they just sort of added these products in to adapt it. So it's not a true Exchange server on its own. It does have some advantages with the contacts, because if you go into the contacts onto it, you can actually sort the contacts and get rid of duplicates and things like this, which Exchange doesn't. So that's the one advantage of it. But to me, the rest of it kind of sucks, and the support isn't that great. And that's why I just don't go there. I'm actually transitioning another client from G Suite back into the regular system.
I had one client that did squirrely stuff because they had like a G Suite with 10 accounts and they
Yeah.
needed 11.
Yeah.
So they did weird things with somebody, like a receptionist got bumped or somebody,
Yeah.
to make sure they didn't get to 10 instead of saying, we're gonna go for $5 more a month and kind of a la carte it.
Yeah, well, I had a client a few years ago, and they're international actually, so I took care of their office here. And they had the G Suite or the Google one. And apparently if there was a phone number was in the content of the email itself, it would get bounced back. And they couldn't figure it out, and they were going through Google, and they just couldn't figure this thing out last time I heard, but,
My Gmail critique is it rejects sending zip files.
Yeah.
Which is like, you got more than one file, you got a whole bunch of nitty gritty stuff, you kinda wanna zip it. And
Yeah.
it's flagged as basically malicious or spam or somehow rejected and
yeah, because it would have to scan those individual files in order to find out if there's malicious
Yeah.
content in it.
So for us technically challenged people,
Yes.
how difficult is it to switch from Google without going into Outlook without too much trouble? Like, could I do it, or would I have to hire somebody?
If you've never done it before, you might have to hire them, but it depends on like who's hosting your website. You could actually contact them, and they might actually help you walk through it. Like I said, like GoDaddy and some other ones, they actually have exchange services linked in with it, like they're sort of a reseller for them.
Okay.
And it'll transition pretty smoothly, so if you call them up and say, look, I want to move to an exchange on it, they may just automatically go through their system or help you do it to transition there.
So I recently had a client ask for Proton Mail. Switzerland, are you familiar with that? As a competitor to Gmail, it was developed by CERN at the lab there. It's apparently super secure. I'm not sure.
No.
Okay.
You know, I tend to stick with the bigger corporate products. It's like antivirus. I stick with Symantec. I use Endpoint as the business class one, but they're the biggest company out there. If a virus comes out, they're going to discover it pretty darn quick. They have the antidote to it. You use some like Kapowski or some small one. They're Russian anyways, but you use them, and they could be weeks behind it. And between that time period, you get one getting infected. So, for me, security, I got lawyers' offices and stuff like that. You just don't want to mess with them. You want to keep it as secure as possible.
So related question on the DNS server. I have another client who has a few email addresses with one provider and just without telling me kind of added in G Suite and has some others.
Yeah.
So I have MX records everywhere.
Oh no.
The G Suite creates a, he's
I'm
going to therapy for this one.
Yeah.
we're gonna need a moment.
It's just like,
No,
it's
it's
a
like,
mess.
just
Like,
tell them to
I don't
open their wallet.
Is that even possible? Like, we're having so many technical issues, I'm batting around emails, and I don't understand the world of email well enough to say, I don't think, I'm kind of advising them to go pick one and stick
Yes.
with it, but.
They really need to do that. What happens is when you set up the records, there's C records, there's actually priority in it. So
Yeah,
it'll
yeah.
take first priority, second priority. So if they do have a secondary one, it might work, but it's going to always shoot everything off to the first priority.
Yeah, which is, the G Suite, so.
Yeah, so that's just asking for a headache.
Yeah, we've had it. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Clear as mud. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. If you haven't dropped me the $5, I greatly appreciate it. It helps me cover the cost of the room. And we have another one of these in about a month. I'm not sure what my talk's gonna be on unless I get 2 volunteers to come up. Anyone have ideas that you would like? Feel free to put them into the meetup group and just suggest things for me. And then I can put together a presentation.
This is my first time coming here. I'm just wondering what the theme of this meetup is it just WordPress or?
It's mostly WordPress unless I get such as Dean here who wants to come in and give a presentation on something else. There'll always be at least one WordPress talk. It's set for 2 hours, so I give two presentations generally. And when I have to do them both myself, I cover 2 different topics unless I have a really big topic to cover. But I do like it when I have another presenter to make it easier. So then I only have to give 1 presentation, or even better if I have 2 presenters. I'll happily let people present. I revived this group. The WordPress Meetup group has been around now for 9 years, I believe. It was created originally from WordCamps, and then it just went fallow for a long time. I used to give these presentations about 4 or 5 years ago. I was the only one giving presentations, but my life and everything else got very busy for a long time, and I just couldn't present. And late last year, or about a year ago, the organizer stepped down. And so I went, okay, I will step up and take the group and organize and reorganize the group and bring it back to life. It is one of the largest WordPress groups in existence. We have over 1,000 members, and this is what we get. So I would love to see. I have filled the room at times. I used to get upwards of 30 people show up.
What kind of people do you get coming out to these?
Everything from beginners,
Self-taught
to high-end techs.
programmers,
Yeah.
business owners.
Everything. It's people that are, if the subject at hand is something that people are interested in, they come. One of my biggest attended ones has always been the beginner seminars. I get a lot of people come out for those. And so, if you've got a suggestion, feel free, let me know. I'm more than happy to take them.
What, you were gonna do some multi-hour things, like 4 hours?
That's what I'm looking at there is not just, they're multi, they are actually training seminars. I'm looking at a full day training seminar of 4 to 6 hours. And, a few hours of training, covering certain things. I'm trying to piece together a whole seminar. I used to give WordPress training classes. It's what got me started in WordPress. I gave full 2 and 4 hour classes. And they take a long time to write. And they take a long time to get correct. And I'm more than happy to do them, but I want to have interest. They're going to cost about $40 a pop per person. And I will have a mandatory no refund policy if you don't show up, just because of the expense. Because what I'll collect for the class will cover the room, give me a little bit of profit, but it'll nowhere near cover the amount of hours I will have to put in to make it worthwhile. I already know what I'm in for, but we've been soliciting people for topics and ideas of what people would like to see. And I'm more than willing to put it together. It'll be something that won't happen until next year in the fall. It's not something that would happen overnight. I mean, when the first time I did class training seminars, I ran into the problem of they weren't very good. And then I ran into a client who his business was teaching people how to create classes. And he needed a website built. So I traded him a website for him teaching me how to build classes. And once I learned that, my classes exponentially improved.
We need to build classes.
Yeah.
Like how to teach classes.
Not teach. Teaching's easy.
How to build it.
How to build the structure and the presentation and the flow. There's a way it needs to come together. If you don't do it, people won't understand what you're doing. And I didn't know that. It was a hard lesson learned. So.
I know for me, I mean, I started with a WordPress course at Camosun, and I ended up actually hiring the instructor because I couldn't get a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
And then it's just allowed me enough to go in, do a blog post, change a page here and there. I still don't know some parts of it. I'm like, I don't know how to get there. I don't know how to do that. For me, I would have an interest in going back to basics and sort of revisiting, the whole side panel and how to look for updates and how to, I wouldn't know what plugins we're using and
And
what's
it's been a couple
working and
years.
what's not.
Things
It's
have
been a
changed.
few
Things
years.
are changing constantly.
Yeah.
Exactly, so
Yeah.
I would be interested in something like that,
Okay.
but I'm in the, pretty basic stages.
Okay.
How about SEO, or is that too big a topic?
SEO is a bit of a big topic, but there are patterns for everyone for SEO. And SEO is not something I'm a real expert at. I'm good enough to get by, but SEO is a business into itself.
Yeah. But there could be something about creating good content or good hygiene of,
That's
good
usually
practices.
rolled into my explanations of things, is how to create your good content. I do read a lot about SEO.
I've been using Yoast.
Yoast.
Yeah.
Yoast. Yeah,
Toast. It's
that
like, it
plugin.
rhymes
It's
with
really
toast.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great because when I'm writing, it's got the red light and the orange light and
Don't shoot for the green light.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I
Fallacy.
shoot for the green light.
And the green
I spent a long
light.
time shooting for that green
But the
light.
green light will actually, the green light could actually
Oh, no kidding.
overdo your site. You could have way too much, what's the word I'm looking
Keyword
for?
stuffing.
You can have way too much keyword stuffing.
I've seen people who kind of take it too far, and if you read it as a person,
Oh,
you're like,
sure.
what the hell is this?
No,
And then,
Yeah.
and then but it
But
ranks very well.
I get a lot of email from them about, if you read their stuff, you could learn quite a bit. I'm
Yeah.
learning, and I
yeah.
understand about keyword stuff.